Our story begins on a stormy night, with Jack settling into his seat on a plane. He had always been a nervous flyer, and the turbulence only made things worse. But he was determined to stay calm, to keep his fears in check. He thought best to distract himself with some work and took his pen and notebook out to try and turn his mind to other matters. With added frustration, he noticed his pen would not work. He stabbed at the paper beneath his clenched fist, cursing silently at the pen under his breath as the plane continued to be rolled and pushed by the storm outside. Suddenly, there was a loud crack of thunder, and the plane jolted. Jack felt a moment of panic before reminding himself that planes were designed to withstand turbulence. He took a deep breath and tried to calm himself, throwing the pen into the disposable bag attached to the seat in front of him. As the plane continued to bounce through the storm, Jack felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see a man in black sitting next to him. He hadn't noticed him before, believing the seat to be unoccupied for the trip. However, the man had a friendly smile and was holding a pen out to Jack. "Excuse me," the man said, "I couldn't help but notice that your pen isn't working. I have an extra one that I'd be happy to give you as a gift." Jack was taken aback by the stranger's kindness. He had never seen someone so generous before, especially not on a plane. He accepted the pen and thanked the man, who introduced himself as Mr. Black. As soon as Jack accepted the pen, he felt different. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He took out a notebook and began to make some notes. The pen glided smoothly across the page, leaving a trail of black ink. Feeling satisfied with his work, Jack decided to take a nap. He drifted off into a deep sleep, and soon he was dreaming. He found himself in a dimly lit prison cell. A man in a black uniform was sitting across from him, scribbling something onto a piece of paper with Jack's pen. The man looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Jack," he said. "I hope you slept well. I've been working on your confession, and I think it's coming along nicely. Why don't you take a look?" He slid the paper and the pen across the table to Jack. He couldn't see the man's face clearly because of the shadows, but something about him made Jack uneasy. Jack looked down at the paper and saw that it was a confession. A confession to what? He didn't know, but it was written in his own handwriting. He was horrified to see that the document was his own death warrant. He tried to back away from the table, but the man in black held up a hand. Now, Jack, you can't just walk away from your problems. You have to face them head on. I know your dark secret, Jack. Sign the paper." The man in what seemed to be a military uniform pushed the very same pen the stranger had given to Jack across the desk to his own trembling hand. Jack shook his head, but the man in black wouldn't take no for an answer. He started to raise his voice, and Jack could see the man's face more clearly now. It was his own face, twisted into a cruel smile. Jack's eyes snapped open, and he found himself back on the plane. He was sweating profusely, and his heart was pounding in his chest. He looked around the cabin and saw that the man in black was gone. He turned to the flight attendant and asked where the man had gone. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, "there was no one sitting next to you. You must have been dreaming." Jack couldn't believe it. The man had been real. He had given him the pen. He looked down at the notebook and saw that the notes he had made were still there, in his own handwriting. But the pen felt warm as it pressed against him in his breast pocket. Over the next hours, Jack couldn't get the dream out of his head. He tried to forget about it, but it was always there, lurking in the back of his mind. He thought of the dark secret the man in the black uniform had spoken of. It was impossible. There was not a human being alive who knew about that. Jack pushed it away to the dark recesses of his tortured mind. The flight attendant returned to Jack's seat and asked if he needed anything else. Jack shook his head and politely declined, still in a daze from his vivid dream. He had never experienced anything like it before, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something ominous about that pen. As the plane continued through the storm, Jack found himself unable to concentrate on his work. He couldn't stop thinking about the man in the black uniform, the prison cell, and the ominous paper that had been pushed towards him. He took the pen out of his pocket and examined it closely, but he couldn't find anything unusual about it. It was just a plain old pen, but it had a strange weight and heat to it, as if it were carrying some hidden power. Finally, the plane landed safely at its destination, and Jack disembarked and made his way to his hotel room. Despite his exhaustion from the long flight, he found himself unable to sleep. He was consumed by his thoughts about the mysterious pen and the dream that had felt so real. He couldn't help but feel that there was something sinister at work, something that he couldn't quite put his finger on. The next day, Jack went about his business as usual. He had a few meetings with clients, made some phone calls, and sent out some emails. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He kept catching himself staring at the pen, which now sat on his desk, seemingly taunting him with its whispers of secrets. As the day wore on, Jack's anxiety grew. He was becoming more and more convinced that the pen was somehow cursed, that it had been imbued with some kind of dark magic. He knew it sounded crazy, but he couldn't help but feel that way. That night, as he lay in bed, he decided to do some research on the pen. He pulled out his laptop and started searching for information on the brand and model of the pen, but he couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. It was just a regular pen, available for purchase at any office supply store. Frustrated and confused, Jack put the laptop away and tried to get some sleep. But as soon as he closed his eyes, he found himself back in the prison cell. The man in the black uniform was there, grinning at him through the shadows. He pushed the paper and the pen towards Jack, and once again, Jack saw his own death warrant staring back at him. This time, however, the dream was different. Instead of waking up in a panic, Jack remained in the dream. He felt a strange pull, as if he were being sucked into the paper itself. He tried to resist, but he couldn't. He was being pulled closer and closer to the words on the page, and he knew that once he reached them, it would be the end of him. Just as he was about to be consumed by the paper, a bright light appeared from what Jack could make out in the ghostly mist was a watchtower with soldiers and guns. He woke up screaming, feeling he was covered in sweat, his heart racing. He knew then that he had to get rid of the pen, no matter the cost. The next morning, he walked out to the balcony of his hotel room and held the pen over the railing. He hesitated for a moment, wondering if he was making a mistake. But then he remembered the dreams, the feeling of being trapped in that prison cell, and he knew that he had to do it. He let go of the pen, and it tumbled down towards the street below. He watched as it fell, getting smaller and smaller until it was nothing more than a tiny dot on the pavement. And then it was gone. As soon as he let go of the pen, Jack felt a weight lift from his soul when the room swirled and went black. He again awoke startled as he found he was back on the plane, that same night as the storm when the stranger gave him that pen. Jack wiped the sweat from his face, trying to collect himself and his senses. He anxiously caught the attention of the flight attendant and asked to confirm what flight this was. As the flight attendant assured him of the same flight he had boarded, he realized the hotel and his throwing of the pen out of the window had also been a dream, or at least a nightmare. He had never left the plane. The flight was turbulent, and Jack's nerves were shot. The man in black was nowhere to be seen, and Jack couldn't help but wonder if he also had been a figment of his imagination. As the plane shook violently in the storm, Jack's heart raced, and he tried to steady his nerves by focusing on the pen in his pocket. Suddenly, there was a blinding flash of lightning, and the plane was jolted violently. Jack's heart stopped as he saw the man in black standing in the aisle, staring at him with cold, unblinking eyes. In that moment, Jack knew with a sickening certainty that the man was real and that something terrible was going to happen. The man beckoned to Jack with a crooked finger, and without thinking, Jack stumbled out of his seat and followed him down the aisle. The plane was eerily silent, the passengers frozen in terror as they watched the strange pair make their way to the back of the plane. In the dim light of the emergency exit signs, the man in black handed Jack a piece of paper and the pen. Jack's hands shook as he read the words scrawled across the page, a confession to a crime he hadn't committed. The man's lips twisted into a cruel smile as he watched Jack read the paper. "Sign it," he whispered, "or suffer the consequences." Jack's mind reeled as he realized the gravity of the situation. He was being set up, and there was no way out. His hand shook as he brought the pen to the paper, his heart pounding in his chest. Suddenly, there was another flash of lightning, and Jack's eyes widened in shock as the man's face was illuminated. It was his own face, twisted into a grotesque, malevolent sneer. Jack recoiled in horror as he realized the truth. The man in black was a manifestation of his own fear and guilt, a creation of his own mind brought to life by the power of the pen. The realization hit Jack like a ton of bricks. He had always known that the pen was special, but he had never understood its true power. It would give him everything he ever wanted: wealth, success, fame, but at a terrible cost. It had opened the door to the darkest corners of his mind, unleashing his deepest fears and insecurities. As the plane descended, Jack's mind raced with fear and confusion. The storm outside had ceased, and the clouds had parted, allowing the sun to shine through. But there was no joy in his heart, only a deep sense of foreboding. The plane landed safely, and Jack collected his bags, his thoughts still consumed by the events of the past few hours. He stepped out of the airport and hailed a cab, still lost in thought. It wasn't until he arrived at his hotel and checked in that he realized the pen was missing. Panic set in, and Jack frantically searched his bags and pockets, but the pen was nowhere to be found. He cursed himself for losing it, knowing that the pen was a dangerous weapon in the wrong hands. As the days went by, Jack tried to put the experience behind him. He focused on his work and enjoyed the perks of his newfound success. But the memory of the man in black and the pen continued to haunt him. One night, as Jack was working late in his hotel room, he heard a knock on the door. He hesitated for a moment, wondering who could be calling at such a late hour. But when he opened the door, there was no one there, only a small package sitting on the floor. Curiosity got the better of him, and Jack opened the package. Inside was a small notebook and a pen, identical to the one he had lost on the plane. A chill ran down his spine as he realized the notebook was filled with names and dates, all of them linked to unspeakable acts of evil. The pen was back in his possession, and he knew he had to destroy it. But try as he might, he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. The power it held over him was too strong, and he found himself using it more and more, unable to resist the temptation. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Jack's life had become a cycle of success and guilt, with the pen always looming over him like a dark cloud. He knew that he was playing with fire, but he couldn't stop. One night, as he was leaving his office, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around to see the man in black standing behind him, a wicked smile on his face. "Time to pay the piper, Jack," the man said, his voice like poison. Jack tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The man in black approached him, holding out his hand. And it was the death warrant that Jack had seen in his dreams so many times before. "Sign it," the man commanded. Jack's mind raced, and he knew he had only one choice. With shaking hands, he took the pen from his pocket and signed the document. The man in black cackled with delight, and in that moment, Jack knew he had sealed his fate. He tried to run again, but this time the man in black grabbed him by the arm, pulling him closer. "You've been a good little pawn, Jack," the man said. "But all good things must come to an end." With that, the man in black disappeared into the night, leaving Jack alone in the darkness. The next day, Jack's body was found in his office, a confession to a dark secret lying on his desk next to the pen. A warning to all when accepting the kindness of a stranger: